JUDAS by John Brunner. Originally published in the first of Harlan Ellison's famous anthologies, Dangerous Visions, in 1967, which has had continuous re-releases ever since. Republished in many other anthologies, including Other Worlds, Other Gods in 1971, and Machines That Think in 1984. It appeared in a collection of the author's stories entitled From This Day Forward in 1972. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. Judas. The Friday evening service was drawing to its close. The rays of the declining spring sun slanted through the polychrome plastic of the windows and lay along the floor of the central aisle like a pool of oil spilt on a wet road. On the polished steel of the altar, a silver wheel spun continually, glinting between two ever-burning mercury vapor lamps. Above it, silhouetted against the darkling eastern sky, there stood a statue of God. The surpliced choir was singing an anthem, the word made steel, and the minister sat listening with his hand cupped under his chin, wondering if God had approved of the sermon he had just preached on the second coming. Most of the large congregation was enraptured by the music. Only one man present, at the end of the rearmost row of bare steel pews, fidgeted impatiently, flexing the rubber pad from the forehead rest before him in nervous fingers. He had to keep his hands occupied, or else they kept straying to the bulge in the inside pocket of his plain brown jacket. His watery blue eyes wandered restlessly along the climactic, sweeping lines of the metal temple and shifted away every time they came to the wheel motif, which the architect, probably God himself, had incorporated wherever possible. The anthem closed on a thrilling dissonance, and the congregation knelt, their heads against the rubber rests, while the minister pronounced the blessing of the wheel. The man in brown wasn't really listening, but he caught a few phrases. May he guide you in your appointed courses, serve you as your eternal pivot, bring you at last to the peace of the true eternal round. Then he stood with the rest of them while the choir marched out to the strains of the electronic organ. Directly the minister had disappeared through the vestry door, the worshippers began to shuffle towards the main exits. He alone remained sitting in his pew. He was not the sort of person one would look at twice. He had sandy hair and a worn, tired face. His teeth were stained and irregular. His clothes fitted badly, and his eyes were a fraction out of focus, as though he needed glasses. Plainly, the service had not brought him peace of mind. Eventually, when everybody else had gone, he stood up and replaced the rubber pad with scrupulous exactitude. For a moment his eyes closed and his lips moved soundlessly, as if this act had endowed him with the courage for a decision. He seemed to draw himself up like a diver poising on a high board. Abruptly, he left the pew and walked, soundless on the rubber carpet of the nave, towards the small steel door that bore the single word, vestry. Beside it there was a bell. He rang. Shortly, the door was opened by a junior acolyte, a youth in a gray robe woven of metallic links that jingled as he moved, hands in gray shiny gloves, scalp hidden under a smooth steel cap. In a voice made impersonal by careful practice, the acolyte said, "You wish counsel?" The man in brown nodded, shifting a trifle nervously from foot to foot. Through the doorway were visible many devotional pictures and statues. He dropped his gaze before them. "What is your name?" the acolyte inquired. "Karamov," said the man in brown. "Julius Karamov." He tensed fractionally as he spoke, his eyes fleeting over the acolyte's face in search of any traction. None showed, and he relaxed on the youth's curt order to wait while he informed the minister. The moment he was alone, Karamov crossed the vestry and examined a painting on the far wall, Anson's Immaculate Manufacture, depicting the legendary origin of God, a bolt of lightning from heaven smiting an ingot of pure steel. It was excellently done, of course. The artist's use of electroluminescent paint for the lightning, in particular, was masterly. But from Karamov it provoked an expression of physical nausea, and after only seconds he had to turn away. At length the minister entered in the officiating robe which identified him as one of the 11 closest to God. His headpiece, which during the service had concealed his shaven scalp, discarded, his white, slender hands playing with a jeweled emblem of the wheel that hung around his neck on a platinum chain. Karamov turned slowly to confront him, right hand slightly raised in a stillborn gesture. It had been a calculated risk to give his real name. He thought that was probably still a secret, but his real face? No hint of recognition. The minister merely said in his professionally resonant voice, "What may I do for you, my son?" The man in brown squared his shoulders and said simply, "I want to talk to God." With the resigned air of one well used to dealing with requests of that sort, the minister sighed. "God is extremely busy, my son," he murmured. "He has the spiritual welfare of the entire human race to look after. Cannot I help you? Is there a particular problem on which you need advice, or do you seek generalized divine guidance in programming your life?" Karamov looked at him diffidently and thought, "This man really believes. His faith isn't just pretense for profit, but deep-seated, honest trust, and it is more terrifying than everything else that even those who were with me at the beginning should believe." He said after a while, "You are kind, Father, but I need more than mere advice. I have—" he seemed to stumble at the word, "prayed much and sought help from several ministers, and still I have not attained to the peace of the true round. Once, long ago, I had the privilege of seeing God in the steel. I wish to do so again. That's all. I have no doubt, of course, that he will remember me." There was a long silence, during which the minister's dark eyes remained fixed on Karamov. Finally he said, "Remember you? Oh, yes, he will certainly remember you. But I remember you too, now." His voice shook with uncontrollable fury, and he reached for a bell on the wall. Strength born of desperation poured through Karamov's scrawny frame. He hurled himself at the minister, striking aside the outstretched arm inches from its goal, bowling the tall man over, seizing the tough chain around his neck and pulling with every ounce of force he could muster. The chain bit deep into pale flesh, as if possessed. Karamov tugged and tugged at it, twisted, took a fresh grip, and tugged again. The minister's eyes bulged, mouth uttered loathsome, formless grunts, fists beat at his attacker's arms, and grew weaker, and ceased. Karamov drew back, shaking at what he had done, and compelled himself unsteadily to his feet. To the former colleague, who now had gone beyond all hope of hearing, he muttered his sick apology, then calmed himself with deep breaths and approached the door by which he had not entered the room. On his throne, beneath its wheel-shaped canopy of steel, God sat. His polished limbs gleamed under the muted lights. His head was beautifully designed to suggest a human face without possessing a single human feature, even eyes. "Blind, insensate thing," thought Karamov as he shut the door behind him. Unconsciously his hand touched what he had in his pocket. The voice, too, was more than humanly perfect, a deep, pure tone as if an organ spoke. It said, "My son," and stopped. Karamov gave an audible sigh of relief, and his nervousness dropped from him like a cloak. He stepped forward casually and sat down in the central one of the 11 chairs arranged in a horseshoe before the throne, while the blank, shiny gaze of the robot rested on him and the whole metal frame locked in astonishment. "Well?" Karamov challenged. "How do you like meeting somebody who doesn't believe in you for a change?" The robot moved in human fashion, relaxing. Steel fingers linked under his chin while he reconsidered the intruder with interest instead of amazement. The voice rang out afresh. "So it's you, Black?" Karamov nodded with a faint smile. "That's what they used to call me in the old days. I used to think it was a silly affectation, assigning the scientists who worked on top-secret projects false names. But it's turned out to have advantages, for me at any rate. I gave my own name of Karamov to your, late apostle outside, and it meant nothing to him. Speaking of real names, by the way, how long is it since anyone addressed you as A46? The robot jerked.
"It is sacrilege to apply that term to me."
"Sacrilege be bothered. I'll go further and remind you what the A stands for in A46. Android. An imitation of a man. A sexless, insensate assembly of metal parts which I helped to design, and it calls itself God." Scathing contempt rode the lashing words. "You and your fantasies of immaculate manufacture, blasted by a bolt of heavenly lightning from a chunk of untooled steel. Talk about making men in God's own image. You're the God who was made in man's." They had even incorporated the facility of shrugging in their design, Karamov recalled with a start as the robot made use of it.
"Leaving sacrilege on one side for a moment, then," the machine said, "is there any real reason why you should deny that I am God? Why should not the second incarnation be an inferation in imperishable steel? As for your benighted and deluded belief that you created the metal part of me, which is anyway supremely unimportant since the spirit alone is eternal. It's long been said that a prophet is without honor in his own country, and since the inferation took place near your experimental station, well..."
Karamov laughed. He said, "Well, I'm damned. I think you believe it yourself."
"You are beyond question damned. For a moment I hoped, seeing you enter my throne room, that you'd learned the error of your ways and come to acknowledge my divinity at last. Of my infinite compassion, I will give you one final chance to do so before I call my ministers to take you away. Now or never, Black or Karamov, or whatever you choose to call yourself. Do you repent and believe?"
Karamov wasn't listening. He was staring past the shining machine into nowhere, while his hand caressed the bulge in his pocket. He said in a low voice, "I've plotted years for this moment. 20 years, ever since the day we turned you on, and I began to suspect we'd gone wrong. Not till now was there anything I could have done. And in the meantime, while I sweated and hunted for a way to stop you, I've seen the ultimate humiliation of mankind. We've been slaves to our tools since the first caveman made the first knife to help him get his supper. After that, there was no going back, and we built till our machines were 10 million times more powerful than ourselves. We gave ourselves cars when we might have learned to run. We made airplanes when we might have grown wings. And then the inevitable. We made a machine our god.
And why not?
The robot boomed.
Can you name any single way in which I am not your superior? I am stronger, more intelligent, and more durable than a man. I have mental and physical powers that shame comparison. I feel no pain. I am immortal and invulnerable, and yet you say I am not God. Why? From perverseness.
No, said Karamov with terrible directness, because you are mad. You were the climax of a decade's work by our team, the dozen most brilliant living cyberneticists. Our dream was to create a mechanical analog of a human being, which could be programmed directly with intelligence drawn from the patterns in our own brains. In that we succeeded far too well. I've had time enough in the past 20 years to work out where we went astray. It was my fault, God help me. The real God, if he exists, not you, you mechanical fraud. Always, somewhere at the back of my mind while we were working on you, there lurked the thought that to build the machine we had envisaged would be to become as God, to make a creative intelligence that none save he had yet achieved. That was megalomania, and I'm ashamed, but it was in my mind, and from mine it was transferred to yours. No one knew of it. Even I was afraid to admit it to myself, for shame is a saving human grace. But you, what could you know of shame, of self-restraint, of empathy and love? Once implanted in your complex of artificial neurons, that mania grew till it knew no bounds, and here you are, insane with the lust for divine glory. Why else? The doctrine of the word made steel, and the image of the wheel, the mechanical form that does not occur in nature. Why else the trouble you go to make parallels in your godless existence with that of the greatest man who ever lived? Karamov was still speaking in the same low tones, but his eyes were ablaze with hatred. You have no soul, and you accuse me of sacrilege. You're a collection of wires and transistors, and you call yourself God. Blasphemy! Only a man could be God. The robot shifted with a clang of metal limbs and said,
All this is not merely nonsense, but a waste of my valuable time. Is that all you came for, to rave at me?
No, said Karamov. I came to kill you. At long last his hand dipped into the bulging pocket and produced the object there concealed, a curious little weapon, less than 6 inches long, a short metal tube extended forward from it. Backward from the hand grip, a flex disappeared inside his coat. Under his thumb there was a small red stud. He said, It took me 20 years to design and build this. We chose steel for your body that only an atomic bomb could destroy. How, though, could one man walk into your presence with a nuclear weapon on his back? I had to wait until I had a means of cutting your steel as easily as a knife cuts a man's weak flesh. Here it is, and now I can undo the wrong I did to my own species. He pressed the stud. The robot, motionless till that moment as if incapable of believing that anyone could really wish to harm him, jolted upright, turned half around, and stood paralyzed as a tiny hole appeared in the metal of his side. Steel began to form little drops around the hole. The surrounding area glowed red, and the drops flowed like water, or blood. Karamov held the weapon steady, though it scorched his fingers. Sweat stood out on his forehead. Another half-minute, and the damage would be irreparable. Behind him a door slammed open. He cursed, for his weapon would not work on a man. To the last moment he kept it aimed. Then he was seized from behind and pinioned, and the weapon torn from its flex and hurled to the floor and stamped into ruin. The robot did not move. The tension of 20 hate-filled years broke, and his relief boiled up into hysterical laughter, which he fought to quell. When he finally succeeded, he saw that the man who held him was the junior acolyte who had admitted him to the vestry, and that there were other men around, strangers, gazing in utter silence at their god. "Look at him! Look at him!" Karamov crowed. "Your idol was nothing but a robot, and what men make they can destroy. He said he was divine, but he wasn't even invulnerable. I've freed you. Don't you understand? I've set you free." But the acolyte wasn't paying him any attention. He stared fixedly at the monstrous metal doll, licking his lips, until at last he said in a voice that was neither relieved nor horrified, but only awed, "The hole in the side." A dream began to die in Karamov's mind. Numb, he watched the other men walk over to the robot and peer into the hole, heard one of them say, "How long to repair the damage?" and the other reply offhandedly, "Oh, 3 days, I guess." And it was clear to him what he had done. Wasn't this a Friday? And in spring? Hadn't he himself known that the robot made careful parallels between his own career and that of the man he parodied? Now it had reached the climax. There had been a death, and there would be a resurrection. On the third day, and the grip of the word-made steel would never be broken. In turn, the men made the sign of the wheel and departed, until one only remained. Stern, he came down from the throne to confront Karamov and address the acolyte who held him in a rigid grasp. "Who is he, anyway?" the man demanded. The acolyte gazed at the limp figure slumped on the chair with the weight of all the ages crushing him, and his mouth rounded in an O of comprehension. He said, "Now I understand. He calls himself Karamov, but his real name must be Iscariot." You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.